Candace Clouseau, aka Pink Panther, strikes again. This is part 2 of the case of the widow. I'm calling it Doubling Down. Inspector Candace Clouseau has returned, and today's episode may have been her finest work. And by finest, I mean evil. But just so we're all on the same page, if by finest work you mean confidently misfiring in high definition, then you're with me, you get it. You know, a lot of people have asked by now, why doesn't somebody just sue her for all this defamation? Because she couches it in this first thing I want to take a look at, where she says, I'm just asking questions.
Little by little, your harmless questions have developed into a regular cross-examination.
That's one of her most obvious tactics recently. I'm not accusing, I'm just asking questions. That line is the rhetorical equivalent of lighting a match and saying, I'm not starting a fire, I'm just exploring combustion. Proverbs 18:21 says, death and life are in the power of the tongue. Questions aren't neutral when they're framed to imply guilt, like they always are with Candace Clouseau. If you ask loaded questions repeatedly about a widow's motives, theology, her character, but never present concrete evidence, and by never I mean not a single time, you're not really investigating. Come on, we all know that. You're insinuating, you're grifting. And when every ordinary thing looks suspicious to you, the problem may not be the objects you're looking at, unless one of them's a mirror. Then there's this whole wisdom above all wisdom vibe she puts out, where it's like, only I see it. The only I see it syndrome. Today, she leaned heavily into, why isn't anybody else talking about this? Why is everyone silent? Why am I the only one who seems to care? Translation, I alone have discernment.
Hop inside my mouth if you want to live.
That is a dangerous posture. Proverbs 11:14 says, where there is no guidance, a people fails, but in abundance of counselors, there's safety. I'm getting the feeling Candace doesn't ask anybody godly or discerning about the moves she makes. She looks for the biggest grifters and the most outrageous personalities and asks them. But biblical discernment does not isolate itself and assume mass blindness. If your brand requires you to be the lone exposer every time, eventually you stop discerning truth and start performing uniqueness or performing for the camera.
Places, everyone, places!
If everyone else is asleep and only you are awake, you might want to check whether you're dreaming. Oh, wait, she is dreaming. In fact, her best evidence and clues and theories seem to come from her dreams.
She spoke to me in a dream.
Next, her tone reveals a lot about her motive. Let's talk tone. Today's episode wasn't cautious when she spoke. It wasn't restrained. It wasn't even careful. It was very sharp and sarcastic. Colossians 4:6 says, let your speech always be gracious, seasoned with salt. Salt is used a lot in the New Testament. What's it talking about? Well, salt preserves truth, and grace preserves credibility. And those things are missing with Candace.
Could you pass the salt?
Therefore, truth isn't preserved, and credibility doesn't exist. When sarcasm outweighs substance, when suspicion outweighs evidence, when grief becomes a backdrop for commentary, you are not defending righteousness. You are amplifying the whole drama. And if every investigation ends in chaos, maybe you're not solving crimes. Next, the whole Israel undercurrent. It's always there with Candace. Here's where it gets very serious. There is a consistent pattern of reframing pro-Israel conviction as manipulation or naivety or worse, deception. Romans 11:1, God's word says, has God rejected his people? By no means. So you can debate policy. You cannot casually cast as suspect without deep, careful theological rigor. Instead, what we're seeing is suspicion framed as bravery. But suspicion alone is not discernment of any kind. What am I talking about? Well, look at James 3:16. It says, where there's jealousy and selfish ambition, there will be disorder. Well, we see the disorder, and I think there's jealousy and envy of Candace being jealous of Erica. Listen, if every theological discernment becomes a dramatic reveal of hidden motives, that's not any kind of theological depth. That is narrative escalation. Again, you're just trying to make money and grift. And when you're grifting off something this painful and horrible, and you almost single-handedly have stopped a revival, wow, I would never want to stand before God with the weight of that. Next, the widow problem. Let's slow down. Exodus 22:22 says, you shall not mistreat any widow or fatherless child. We've got a widow here and 2 fatherless children. Now, look, that doesn't mean that widows are above critique. It means your posture toward them is cautious and careful and loving and gracious, and that's just never been the case. In fact, Candace has lied and been brutal. She said if Erica told her to stop, she'd stop. Erica said it 3 times. She never intended to stop. Listen, when your instinct is interrogate first, speculate second, amplify third, then you are not reflecting biblical instinct. You are reflecting platform instinct.
Negativity sells a bit better, gets more clicks, but...
And that's the uncomfortable tension here. Is this some kind of conviction that Candace has? Or is this combustible content? I think if anybody's honest, you know the answer to that. Next, have you noticed that the biggest clues are just the pattern? Here's the truth. Candace is sharp. She is articulate, except that she can't pronounce certain words. Not sure how that fits. It's kind of funny, though. She does know how to frame a narrative. But when escalation becomes predictable and when outrage becomes cyclical, when every few months there's a new mass deception revelation and she forgets the last one that she had or never brings the evidence promised, well, then start looking at the pattern, because the pattern itself becomes the evidence. Jesus said, by their fruit you will know them. Matthew 7:16. What is the fruit here, friends? Is it unity? Is it clarity? Is it godly? Is it measured? Or is it sharp, vicious, evil, hurtful, polarizing, suspicious, perpetual conflict? It's pretty obvious. There's no godly fruit coming from this. It's just dividing and making people angry and ruining the conservative movement. Listen, sometimes the real case isn't the widow. It's the detective. Inspector Candace Clouseau believes she's exposing deception, or she's deceiving us into thinking she believes that. But I just wonder, when every investigation ends with more fire than light, eventually people stop trusting the detective. I think it's time to do that here. Want to save your brain? Stop watching Candace Clouseau. But in case you're going to watch her, I'm going to expose the next one too. Check out part 3.